I want you to imagine something for just a second. You are dropping a gear, leaning your entire body weight into this insanely sharp mountain hairpin curve, and suddenly you feel this absolute, just howling surge of power right beneath you.
Oh, yeah. That is a very specific feeling.
Right. We are talking about the, 16,000 RPM scream of a Kawasaki Ninja ZX6R inline-4 engine, just echoing off the canyon walls. Your heart is pounding, the wind is ripping past your helmet, and literally the entire world outside of that one specific curve just completely evaporates.
It's an incredibly visceral state to be in.
It really is. You are completely, intensely locked into the present moment. And to you listening, whether you've, spent your whole life on two wheels or you've never even sat on a motorcycle, what we're looking at today is essentially a masterclass in human psychology.
Exactly, yeah. This isn't just a gearhead breakdown.
No, not at all. We are decoding the intense psychology of sport bike mountain riding. So we're looking at a huge stack of research for this deep dive. We've got neurological breakdowns from the surf psychologist and the OU sport and exercise team.
Plus the mechanical data from Kawasaki UK and motorcycle.com.
Right, and we're mixing that with raw, unfiltered community perspectives from Reddit, the American Motorcycle Brotherhood, and some really sobering road safety data from DCRA Road Safety.
That DCRA stuff is fascinating.
It is wild. Our goal here is to figure out how high-speed mechanical feedback acts as a catalyst for these profound neurological changes. We want to understand the delicate balance between achieving that ultimate cognitive flow state
and, the very stark reality of just staying alive on a public road.
Exactly. Okay, let's unpack this, because the motorcycle is basically the ultimate biofeedback machine here, right?
Oh, 100%. You really can't separate the psychological state from the physical instrument that's, inducing it.
Yeah.
When we look at a machine like the Kawasaki Ninja ZX6R, we're looking at something the community basically calls a street weapon. It's a super sport.
Which means it was designed for the track first, right?
Exactly. It was built to win track championships, and then they just retrofitted it with just enough lighting and emission stuff to be legal on public pavement.
Right. So the ergonomics, the power delivery, the chassis, none of this is designed for a relaxed Sunday cruise.
No, not at all.
It's designed to be pushed to the absolute edge of physics. So to understand the rider's brain state, we have to look really closely at the mechanical inputs the brain is getting. And the engine is a perfect starting point.
Yeah, the sources from Kawasaki UK highlight this very specific engineering choice. It's a 636cc inline-4 engine.
Right, and that 36cc bump is famous, right? Because historically, that class was strictly 600cc for racing limits.
Exactly. Kawasaki just threw that rule book out and added that extra 36 cubic centimeters. And mechanically, what that does is create a much thicker mid-range torque curve.
Which is a huge deal for canyon riding.
Right, because on a racetrack, you're always keeping the engine screaming at maximum RPMs. But on a canyon road, you're constantly rolling off the throttle for these tight, blind corners.
Yeah, and then demanding immediate acceleration on the exit.
Exactly. So that extra 36cc gives you the grunt needed to launch the bike out of those slow corners without, constantly dancing on the shift lever.
It just changes the whole character of the power. But engine power means, nothing if it doesn't translate into feedback for the rider.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The chassis and the suspension are where the true communication happens. It's the conversation between the asphalt and your nervous system.
Yeah.
The ZX6R uses a race-derived perimeter frame paired with this front suspension system called the Showa SFFBP.
Which stands for Separate Function Fork, Big Piston. Let's break down the mechanics of that, because the way this fork works is directly responsible for the sensory data the brain receives.
Right. So in a traditional fork, both the left and right tubes have springs to support the weight, and they both have hydraulic damping systems.
To control how fast the springs compress and bounce back.
Exactly. But the Showa SFFBP completely splits those duties.
Yeah.
The left fork tube only has the spring. The right fork tube has all the hydraulic damping circuitry.
Wait, really? So they are totally separated?
Totally separated. And by doing that, they free up a ton of internal volume inside that right fork tube.
Which lets them use a much larger internal piston.
Hence the big piston name.
Yeah.
And when you increase the surface area of that piston pushing through the fluid, you drastically reduce the internal pressure needed to absorb a bump.
Oh, wow. So it's much more sensitive.
Incredibly smooth, right, from the initial stroke. So when a rider is leaned over at a 45-degree angle, that big piston fork isn't just absorbing bumps.
It's basically transmitting the microscopic texture of the asphalt.
Exactly. Straight up through the aluminum chassis into the clip-on handlebars and right into the rider's hands. You can literally feel the grain of the pavement.
That is wild. And that tactile resolution is critical because you're feeling the road through a contact patch of rubber that is what? The size of a credit card.
Basically, yeah, just a tiny patch. And the source materials mention riders pairing this with really aggressive multi-compound tires.
Like the Pirelli Diablo Rosso Thor.
Right. Those tires use a harder compound in the center so they don't wear out going in a straight line. But as you lean over, you transition onto this much softer, super sticky carbon black compound on the shoulders.
So you're relying entirely on that Showa suspension to tell you exactly when that soft rubber is maxed out on grip.
Exactly. And managing that grip brings us to the braking. The ZX6R has dual 310mm front discs with radial mount monoblock calipers.
Right, and radial mount just means they're bolted parallel to the discs, right?
Yeah, which significantly reduces any flexing of the caliper under extreme pressure.
Which makes sense. I mean, when you're rushing toward a hairpin and squeeze that front brake, you aren't just slowing down. You're actively managing the weight transfer of the entire motorcycle.
You're compressing that front fork, driving that front Pirelli tire into the pavement to maximize that credit card-sized patch before you turn.
So the feedback is just this high-fidelity stream of friction data. But alongside that tactile data, there is this overwhelming auditory and vibratory thing happening.
Oh, the noise is intense. If you look at community footage like riders like the Cowboy or Live by Rush on YouTube, the auditory environment is nuts.
Yeah, a lot of them rip off the heavy stock exhaust and put on something like an Aero or an M4 pipe.
And an inline-4 spinning at 16,000 RPM through a free-flowing exhaust doesn't just make noise, it produces a high-frequency acoustic wave.
It's a mechanical scream. I mean, at 16,000 RPM, those pistons are traveling up and down over 260 times a second.
Right.
That vibration transfers through the foot pegs, into your boots, through the seat.
Yeah.
The engine is essentially a massive tuning fork.
And you are sitting right on top of it. You are bathed in that mechanical frequency. But as raw as all that sounds, it's heavily mediated by digital tech.
Right. The motorcycle.com breakdown highlights the KTRC Kawasaki traction control.
Which is crucial because a canyon road is unpredictable. You might hit a patch of sand or, a damp section in the shade.
And the traction control uses sensors to monitor wheel speed, right? Like thousands of times a second.
Exactly. If the rear wheel spins faster than the front, the computer instantly adjusts the ignition timing to cut power and restore grip.
Usually before the rider even realizes they were slipping.
Yeah, it's a millisecond-level digital safety net. But the piece of tech that really alters the flow of the ride is the KQS, the quick shifter.
Okay, I love this part because normally accelerating out of a corner, shifting up is a whole process.
Right. Roll off throttle, pull clutch, kick the lever up, release clutch, roll back on throttle.
It takes maybe half a second, but it completely disrupts the chassis. The suspension unloads when you cut power, then compresses again.
The quick shifter just eliminates that. There's a sensor on the shift linkage. When your foot pushes up, it sends a signal to the ECU to cut the ignition spark for a fraction of a millisecond.
So it unloads the tension on the gears, and the next gear just slides in.
Seamlessly.
Yeah.
You never pull the clutch. You never close the throttle. You just keep it pinned and tap your foot.
From a psychological standpoint, that removes a massive layer of conscious thought. You aren't thinking about the mechanics of shifting. You just think, I want to go faster, and tap your foot.
The barrier between intention and execution gets vanishingly thin. But, we should mention the physical toll. The aggressive ergonomics pitch you heavily forward.
Right, all your weight is on your wrists, knees tucked up high, great for aerodynamics on a straightaway, horrible for a multi-hour canyon ride.
Which is why the forums are full of riders modifying the geometry. They add clip-on risers to raise the bars an inch, maybe lower the foot pegs.
I saw one guy describe it as mutating a track weapon into a mountain road touring beast. They refuse to give up the big piston fork, but they tweak it just enough to survive the physical endurance test.
They're curating the machine to maximize their time in this very specific psychological state. Which brings us to the core question here.
Yes. With so much extreme sensory input, the G-forces, the screaming exhaust, the wind, the hyper-focused data processing, does this overload distract the rider, or does it force a bizarre kind of focus?
Intuitively, you'd think it would overwhelm them. If you put someone in a simulator and blasted them with that much data, they'd probably just freeze up in panic.
Right, they'd crash the simulator instantly.
But that's the paradox of mountain riding. The extreme input doesn't overwhelm the rider. It acts as a forcing function for this intensely rare state of focus.
The chaos creates the silence.
Exactly. The sheer volume of sensory data crowding into the brain leaves absolutely zero metabolic bandwidth for anything else. And this takes us into the neuroscience from the OU Sport and Exercise team and the surf psychologist.
We are talking about the biological induction of the flow state.
Right.
And let's define flow, because people use it like a corporate buzzword now, but the science is super precise. The psychologist, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, pioneered it. He defined it as this optimal state of consciousness, where you are so completely immersed that time distorts, self-consciousness vanishes, and performance peaks.
But the trigger is a very delicate equilibrium. The difficulty of the challenge has to perfectly match your skill level.
Right. Because if the challenge is way higher than your skill,
Your brain floods with cortisol. You get anxious, you stiffen up, make jerky inputs on the controls, and it becomes dangerous.
and if your skill is way higher than the challenge, like being stuck behind a minivan on a flat highway,
You get bored. Your mind wanders. Flow exists on the razor's edge between anxiety and boredom. When you navigate a twisting canyon at a pace that demands 100% of your skill, your brain undergoes a radical structural shift.
here's where it gets really interesting. The term for that shift is transient hypofrontality.
Yes.
Transient meaning temporary, hypo meaning less or underactive, and frontality pointing right to the prefrontal cortex.
Which is the part of the brain that evolved most recently. It handles long-term planning, social inhibitions, and our sense of self. It's basically the engine room of the inner critic.
It's the part that agonizes over a deadline or cringes at something you said 5 years ago.
Exactly. But it is also incredibly metabolically expensive. It takes a ton of energy to run those background simulations. So when you dive into a corner on a sport bike, your brain is suddenly hit with an avalanche of immediate survival calculations.
Visual data for the corner arc, tactile data for grip, auditory data for RPMs, spatial data for lean angle. It's a tsunami.
Right, and the brain realizes it has a huge resource problem. It physically cannot calculate the physics of a decreasing radius corner while also worrying about next month's rent.
So it executes a brutal prioritization protocol.
It physically pulls blood flow and metabolic energy away from the prefrontal cortex, powers it down, and diverts all resources to the motor cortex and sensory centers.
It's an evolutionary survival mechanism.
It really is. You're turning off the slow, self-reflective parts to maximize fast twitch instinct.
It's like your brain is a smartphone. The motorcycle forces you to swipe up and close all the background apps, work, bills, relationship drama, and dedicates 100% of your RAM to this one high-speed task.
That's a perfect analogy. And when that inner critic is forced closed, the psychological relief is immense. But it's not just powering down. It's accompanied by a massive neurochemical flood.
Right, the OU Sport and Exercise piece breaks down this cocktail of performance-enhancing chemicals. The first one is dopamine.
And people usually just think of dopamine as a reward chemical, like eating chocolate.
Yeah, exactly.
But in high-speed flow, dopamine is a massive signal booster for pattern recognition. It helps you recognize the subtle visual cues of the road before you even consciously register them.
It lets you predict the line through a sequence of curves, and then you add norepinephrine to that.
Which spikes your physical arousal, dilates your pupils, and drastically accelerates your reaction times. It's the fight-or-flight chemical, harnessed for hyper-focused performance.
But wrestling a bike causes real muscle fatigue, which is where the endorphins come in, right?
Right. Endorphins are endogenous opioids. They bind to the same receptors as painkillers. They mask the burning in your thighs and trigger a profound euphoria.
It's the runner's high, but triggered by speed.
Exactly. And a final piece from the surf psychologist research is anandamide.
This one is fascinating. It's an endocannabinoid, right?
Yes, the word literally comes from the Sanskrit for bliss. And for canyon riding, it promotes lateral creative thinking. Because a canyon road isn't a sanitized track.
It's chaotic, gravel, damp spots, unpredictable corners.
And anandamide helps your brain rapidly and creatively adapt to those unpredictable variables without panicking.
So you have razor-sharp pattern recognition, lightning reflexes, pain relief, and creative adaptability, all hitting while the anxiety-producing prefrontal cortex is completely shut off.
It is essentially a superhuman brain state, and we can actually measure this shift in the brain waves.
Yeah. In our normal stressed-out waking state, our brains are in the beta wave frequency, like 14 to 30 hertz.
Active, busy, anxious.
Right. But when a rider slips into flow, it slows down into the alpha range, 8 to 13 hertz.
Which is relaxed but highly alert. It's the exact frequency of deep meditation. The rider stops overthinking and just observes and reacts.
And if the challenge perfectly matches their skill, they can drop even deeper into theta waves.
Theta is 4 to 7 hertz. Usually you only hit that right on the edge of sleep or during REM dreaming. When a rider hits theta awake, they're bypassing conscious thought entirely. Pure intuition.
Zero lag between seeing a corner and leaning the bike. And the research also notes bursts of gamma waves.
Gamma waves synchronize information from different brain areas. They fuse the auditory scream of the engine, the tactile grip of the suspension, and the visual data of the road into one cohesive stream of consciousness.
Which brings us to a crucial understanding of why people actually do this. Because if you go on the motorcycle subreddit or talk to the American Motorcycle Brotherhood, they aren't talking about gamma waves.
No, not at all.
The language they use is profoundly emotional. They talk about it as a form of therapy.
That word therapy comes up constantly. They frame this intense physical activity as a necessary mental sanctuary. The phrase that echoes everywhere is shutting off the noise.
The modern world is just constant psychological noise, micro-stresses everywhere.
And mastering a dangerous machine feels like ultimate freedom from that. It's a paradox of constraint. The motorcycle demands such absolute focus that it forcibly evicts all other thoughts.
You literally cannot worry about your crumbling marriage or your inbox when you're calculating entry speed for a blind downhill corner. Because the penalty for losing focus isn't a bad grade, it's a catastrophic physical crash.
The danger is the mechanism that enforces the presence. Moto House Service actually breaks this down into core pillars. The first is exactly this: mindfulness and focus. It's an active form of meditation for people whose minds are too hyperactive to sit in silence.
Meditation through mechanical violence. I love that. The 636cc engine clears your mind so you don't have to try.
Right. The second pillar they identify is challenge and mastery. Navigating a supersport is a really complex physics problem.
Managing the traction circle, trail braking, body weight.
It requires a continuous loop of learning and adjusting. Mastering that builds deep self-confidence and self-efficacy that you often don't get in modern knowledge work.
You physically feel yourself getting better. And the third pillar is the connection to nature, which is a massive difference from driving a sports car.
A car is an isolation chamber, climate control, sound deadening. On a motorcycle, you are violently exposed to the environment.
You feel the microclimates, the sudden 10-degree drop when you hit a mountain shadow. You smell the pine needles. You feel the changing density of the wind. It roots you intensely into the physical world.
And the final pillar is identity and community. The culture is tribal. The shared understanding of the risks, the shared vernacular, it fosters a profound sense of belonging.
And when you lay those pillars out, they map perfectly onto the scientific triggers of flow. The perfect balance of difficulty, the immediate feedback from the Showa suspension, the elimination of distractions inside the helmet.
It is an optimized ecosystem for generating flow.
To everyone listening, pause and apply this to your own life for a second. You might have zero desire to wrestle a 100 horsepower machine on a cliff edge, but where is your canyon road? Surfing, climbing, coding. Where do you find that harmony that silences your inner critic? Because the research suggests finding this state is a fundamental neurological need.
It's a critical reset button for the modern brain. But, and this is a massive, but when you use a machine capable of 150 miles per hour on a public road to fulfill this need, the variables become incredibly dangerous.
This raises an important question. If the flow state is this euphoric, therapeutic realm of perfect focus, what is the catch? Because there's always a breaking point.
We find that breaking point in the research from DECRA Road Safety, specifically a study by F. Reinberg. He investigated how flow actually alters a rider's perception of risk.
Intuitively, you'd think a rider in ultimate focus is the safest rider on the road, right? Their reaction times are peaked, their pattern recognition is boosted.
But Reinberg found the exact opposite. When a rider is deeply submerged in flow, their conscious, deliberate control over their safety evaporates.
Wait, really? It just evaporates?
It evaporates because of transient hypofrontality. The prefrontal cortex, the part that says, hey, keep your speed down, there might be a deer, is powered off. The intention to ride safely is a future-oriented, abstract thought, and flow only allows for immediate, present-tense processing.
So the conscious brain just hands the controls over to the unconscious brain. And the DECRA research points out that the unconscious brain has one main objective: maintain the neurochemical high of the flow state.
Exactly. And remember, flow requires the challenge to constantly match the skill level.
Ah, that is the trap.
As the rider warms up, as the Pirelli tires heat up and grip better, the activity gets easier. Their effective skill level rises. But if it gets too easy, flow collapses into boredom and the high shuts off.
So to prevent that, the unconscious brain initiates risk homeostasis. It automatically pushes the rider to increase the challenge to keep the flow active.
Without even making a conscious decision, they lean a few degrees lower, Brake 10 feet later, roll on the throttle a fraction earlier. They incrementally escalate their speed.
So they enter a state that is functionally optimal for maintaining the high, but practically disastrous for a public road with oncoming traffic and guardrails.
It's terrifying.
Yeah.
The exact same neurological mechanism that makes the ride therapeutics strips away their risk assessment. You are at peak functional capacity, but your strategic judgment is entirely compromised.
The DECUR research has this jarring detail about how riders escape this cycle. Because how does the ride ever end safely? The study notes they rarely just decide to slow down. They usually only snap out of it through a sudden shock.
A spike of pure terror.
Like a near miss.
Yeah, a car drifting over the double yellow, or the front tire chattering over a bump. That sudden survival panic jolts the prefrontal cortex back online like a defibrillator. They wake up at 80 miles per hour and think, my God, how fast was I just going?
A violent return to reality. And DeGuerra correlates this with some surprising demographic data. Riders over 40 are at a particularly high risk of falling victim to this flow safety paradox.
It's a clash between economics and biology. A lot of riders in their 40s and 50s are returning to the sport or starting fresh, and they finally have the money for a flagship machine like the ZX6R.
But biology is unforgiving. Reaction times naturally slow down as we age. Visual acuity degrades.
So you have a rider with diminished physical reactions piloting a race machine. Their unconscious brain pushes them to seek the flow state high by going faster, but their aging physical hardware might not be able to cash the checks their neurochemistry is writing.
A significantly narrowed margin for error. But while we're on the risks of motorcyclists, we have to talk about the Rowden study from 2016 because it completely shatters the stereotype of bikers being aggressive adrenaline junkies.
Oh, this study's brilliant. Look at contextual aggression. They wanted to measure road rage in car drivers versus motorcyclists.
And what did they find?
Car drivers express significantly more aggression on the road than motorcyclists.
Wow.
The key variable is vulnerability. When you're in a modern car, you're in a 2-ton steel cage with airbags and anonymity. It creates a false sense of invincibility. And when humans feel insulated from physical consequences, aggression flourishes, tailgating, brake checking.
Because they feel safe. But for a motorcyclist, the context is radically different. A minor fender bender at 30 miles per hour might scratch a car's bumper, but it could mean a broken femur for a rider.
Because the physical consequences are so brutally high, motorcyclists cannot afford the luxury of road rage.
Their vulnerability forces them into hyper-defensive, anticipatory driving. They assume every car is going to pull out in front of them.
They rely on a passive vigilance that angry car drivers just don't utilize.
Which brings us to the ultimate synthesis here. If we connect this to the bigger picture, if the flow state turns off the logical safety planner and you're surrounded by unpredictable, aggressive car drivers, how do you survive a canyon run? How do you prepare for an emergency when your conscious brain is powered down?
You have to engineer your safety into your subconscious. DKRA emphasizes that survival in flow depends entirely on muscle memory, defensive lane positioning, managing entry speeds, fighting target fixation, which is when you steer directly toward the hazard you're staring at. All of that must be drilled into the nervous system until it's automatic.
You are basically programming your autopilot. When your conscious mind checks out, the underlying operating system has to be incredibly defensive. And the only way to write that code is relentless training.
The DCARE is adamant. Safety courses shouldn't be a one-time hoop to get a license. They recommend continuous training every season, regardless of experience.
And emergency braking is huge here, right?
Massive. The physics of stopping a bike in a panic are complex. If you grab the front brake too hard, you lock the wheel and crash. Research shows even veteran riders fail to brake optimally in sudden emergencies. Even with advanced ABS, they fail to squeeze hard or fast enough because they haven't practiced threshold braking.
You have to myelinate those neural pathways. Go to a parking lot and practice until your hand inherently knows the pressure, because when a deer jumps out, you do not have time to consciously think about percentages of pressure. You just react.
But even with perfect muscle memory, a public road is unpredictable. You could do everything right and hit a patch of oil. That is where the physical safety net has to get you.
The final non-negotiable barrier. 8TJ8AT. All the gear, all the time.
It's the physical manifestation of accepting risk. High-quality protective gear dictates the outcome of a failure. Abrasion-resistant leathers, CE-rated non-Newtonian impact armor that hardens on impact.
Reinforced gauntlet gloves, rigid boots to save the ankles, and obviously an ECE or SNELL certified full-face helmet. Decora also stresses retroreflective materials to cut through the visual clutter for those distracted car drivers.
You wear the gear not because you plan to crash, but because you respect the violence of physics.
It shows maturity, and I think that's the core of this whole exploration. True mastery of sport bike mountain riding isn't just about taming a 16,000 RPM engine or chasing the dopamine rush of transient hypofrontality. True mastery is the psychological maturity to balance that highly addictive flow state with strict, uncompromising physical discipline.
Walking the razor's edge, extracting the psychological benefits while building the habitual safety nets to survive it.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today. From the mechanical violence of the ZX6R, the Showa big piston forks, the acoustic frequencies, to how that sensory avalanche shuts down the prefrontal cortex and floods the synapses with neurochemicals. We explored the active therapy of being entirely present, but also the terrifying flow safety paradox where we lose our perception of risk.
It's a phenomenal demonstration of what humans will endure just to find a fleeting moment of absolute clarity.
So what does this all mean? To everyone listening, the grand takeaway transcends motorcycles. It reveals a deep human need to find focus, to silence the exhausting chatter of the modern world. It's a lesson in respecting our biological limits.
And that leaves us with a deeply provocative thought. In our modern society, we've systematically engineered physical risk out of our daily routines. Our lives are safer and more digitally distracted than ever. Yet, high-consequence activities like sport bike riding remain one of the few reliable ways to induce transient hypofrontality and escape chronic anxiety.
We have to ask ourselves, by eliminating physical risk from our daily lives, are we structurally depriving our brains of the mechanism required for mental peace? And if we aren't willing to find that silence by wrestling a 16,000 RPM machine on a cliff edge, where else in our modern world can we possibly find it?